Are you looking for a new and interesting way to expand your creativity? I have a suggestion for you, and that is collaborate with other artists. Hi, my name is Paul from Studio Centrale, and this is the Humble Creative Podcast. Let's get right into this. For the last 18 months, I've been collaborating with my friend Mike on a project that looks at the relationship between the written word in the form of poems and visual art in the form of photographs, drawings, etc. We took an exercise from a book called The Photographer's Playbook, which was proposed by a college instructor who had an exercise that he would give a class of new photography students that was meant to unfold over the entire term. Mike and I met, we talked about how that project was actually described in the book, and Mike suggested a number of modifications to the way we would proceed, which I was really thankful for, and that in and of itself is an example of how collaborating can expand your own creative outlook on how to do a project. The project was based on the following. What we did was we exchanged a book of poetry, one from Mike's library that he gave to me, one from my library that I gave to Mike. We started with a random selection of a poem from each book. Mike used a poem from the book that I gave him, and I used a poem from the book that he gave me. We took about a 2-month period of time to familiarize ourselves with the poem, to reread it, to think not constantly, but from time to time about the poem, its meaning, what sort of visual elements came to mind as we read those poems. Those ideas were distilled in a list of 10 words, and then we went off and we each made a few images based on all of that, taking the poem deeply into ourselves. And on the deadline date, we would exchange the words of the poem, the words that we'd written down, and the final image that we selected from the few images that we made. Each subsequent round of the collaboration, I would choose a poem from my book that I felt connected fairly well to the poem that Mike had used in the previous round, his list of words from that previous round, and his image from that previous round. And we continued this for a total of 6 rounds. How does collaboration expand your creativity? I'm going to suggest 5 different ways that can happen. And I have some notes, and I'm going to refer to my notes as I do this part of the podcast episode, because I just can't keep things in my little pea brain for long enough. So the first is accountability and consistency. As individual creatives, we all struggle from time to time with setting deadlines, meeting deadlines, and being consistent in our creative practice. When you collaborate with another person or with a group of people, you are now responsible not just for your own consistency and accountability, but you're also contributing to the overall accountability and consistency of the group. And so this really helps you hone in on that practice and get better at being consistent and being accountable through the setting of deadlines. And that's one of the main things that worked so well for Mike and I. We had collaborated for a number of years when we were members of the VI Collective, and we had a good sense of how we worked together. We started by saying that we were going to have a 2-month period for each round, with a hard deadline at the end of that 2 months to share what we had found out about our poems and the image that we'd made. But at the same time, we were sensitive to the challenges of each other's life, and there were times when we needed to modify the deadline. And when you're working on your own and you need to modify a deadline, doubt starts to creep into your mind about, am I procrastinating? Oh man, I'm letting myself down all over again. But when you're working with somebody else in a collaborative project, you have a support system and the understanding of another person whose life also intervenes from time to time and affects how well they're able to meet a deadline and maintain their consistency. So that came into play during our collaboration, and it gave me a renewed sense of the importance of, yes, being consistent, yes, having deadlines, but also being compassionate with myself if I have to miss a deadline or change a deadline, for example. And if you'll excuse me, I'll refer to my notes again. I think the second benefit is something that I often refer to as finding your tribe. You're most likely going to collaborate with somebody who shares your interest in creativity, who is themselves driven to have a creative life. And even if you're not working in exactly the same media or with the same intention, it's really heartwarming, and the support you get from working with somebody else that shares your interests is tremendous. And that's something that I've benefited from tremendously with Mike, as I think mentioned earlier in this episode. Mike and I have known each other for about 10 years. We met in a workshop given by Susan Bernstein, and out of that workshop formed a small group of 4 people called the VI Collective. We met for a number of years where we would meet, every few months, just share work that we'd been doing in the past few months and getting some feedback from other members of the group. And so that was a really wonderful environment. And Mike and I have continued to do that. We did it through the pandemic. We've done it since the pandemic, and we've done it during this current collaboration. So that's a tremendous benefit. One of the great things about collaborating with other people is you are connecting directly and meaningfully with people who share your interests in creativity. I have to pick the other page up from the floor here. So, yes. A third way that your creativity can expand and benefit from collaboration is through exposure to different tools and techniques. You have your way of working, but the person or people that you collaborate will have their own and either slightly different or incredibly different ways of working and use different tools. So it's an opportunity for you to learn new ways of working, to try them out. And you have the opportunity to see how somebody else is using those methods and tools successfully. So you're not just trying to learn something new on your own, you're learning by watching somebody who has embraced these techniques or tools so that's an advantage to you, because you don't have to wonder exactly how do I do this or that. Well, you can ask the person that you're collaborating with. And in the case of our collaboration, it was designed specifically, I think, to highlight different ways of working. And one of the interesting things that happened during the collaboration was, through the course of the 6 rounds, each of us evolved the way that we were working. So let me say that again without the pregnant pause there. Each of us evolved the way we were working, and we evolved in different ways. And I would say, even though the ways that I approached this project did not mimic or take on board necessarily the methods and techniques that Mike was working with, I still found a connection between how I was evolving the way that I approached the project with how Mike was evolving during doing the work for the project. So it was tremendous. You know, I learned a lot from doing that. And I think in particular, particularly in the photography field, which this project was primarily based on, there's a great emphasis on consistency of images, of consistency of working methods, particularly for an individual project. And so it was very refreshing to work on a project where that went all out the window. We weren't thinking about that at all. We were just thinking about how are we responding to the poems that we were working with. And as we worked, we wanted to test out or try out new ways of expressing how we were responding to the poetry. So that would not necessarily happen if I was working on my own on a project like this. I really benefited from having Mike as a collaborator in this endeavor. Here's my sheet of paper. The fourth benefit of collaborating is cross-pollination of ideas. And what I mean by that is the probably classical example would be, let's say, I'll take for example our VI group, which had 4 members. So when we were discussing the idea of doing something more project-based with our group, we got to a point where we all agreed that we've been meeting now for a couple of years and it's been great to share work and see what everyone's working on. What could we do together? Could we do something together? So we had 4 people in the room putting out ideas, and ultimately as a group we decided that we would do an annual photo zine. And the more we discussed that idea, we decided that we didn't want to just do a photo zine where we all took our best photos from the previous year and we each had, say, 8 pages in the photo zine to show off our best photos. We wanted to actually challenge ourselves to collaborate more, and that evolved into the idea of call and response, which became the title of the photo zine. So each year we would decide on a way that we were going to be prompting each other for new work. And again, through responding to those prompts, we would continue through several rounds of producing new work for the zine where we responded to the initial responses. So this sometimes involved responding to words or phrases or quotes or poetry, but it could also, at other times, it was responding to images directly. So it was quite varied in its full scope. In the collaboration that Mike and I did, one of the ways that, so the primary way that this played out was the collaboration was designed specifically to be call and response. But it was, I think, very interesting and certainly for me unusual that one of the ways of responding was through the selection of the next poem that I would use for the subsequent round after each round had been completed. And that was novel to me. It was a wonderful way to get to learn the book of poetry and the poet himself. The book that Mike gave me is called The Weather in Japan. It's a collection of poems by Michael Longley, the Irish poet. And I really learned a lot and grew, I think, a lot in terms of my ability to appreciate poetry through this mechanism. So the cross-pollination of ideas that we had during our collaboration really expanded my creativity in that sense, in appreciation of the written word, in appreciation of how meaning is conveyed and how that meaning can in turn convey ideas for me in terms of image making. Okay, so a fifth way that collaboration can expand your creativity. Let me check my notes, shall I? Opportunities for broader reach and impact of your work. That's a fancy phrase. Thanks ChatGPT for that one. But basically what want to talk about here is you have people who follow your work, who appreciate your work. The people that you are in a collaboration with similarly have outlets for how they put their work out into the world. They may or may not be the same as yours. They may differ from yours. They'll probably have different people following their work as they put it out compared to the people that you have. And when you collaborate, this opens the opportunity up for the people who follow your collaborators to see your work. It's a new audience for your work, essentially. And it may also bring your artistic presence to new platforms, for example, or new ways of sharing work. So we haven't decided on a final form for this project, how we will put the work out, or even if we will put the work out. But one of the things we did during the project was we started a Substack newsletter specifically for us to have an opportunity between our occasional meetings in person to share our thoughts and the effect of each round as we completed it. And we made that Substack publicly subscribable, and a small number of people subscribe to it. So that is one form of output. And of course, people who follow Mike might have been drawn to subscribe to the Substack newsletter, and conversely, people who follow me may have subscribed to the Substack newsletter. And so people from our individual audiences have been exposed and have learned about so Mike's audience has learned a bit about what I'm doing, and vice versa. So opportunities for a broader reach and impact. There we go. So I gave you 5. And do I have a bonus? Well, obviously these are not the only 5 ways that collaboration can impact and expand your creativity. There are many others. I just want to say I really appreciate you watching. I appreciate your creativity. I hope one day to learn more about it. Thank you for being a creative. Thank you for owning your own creativity, for being interested in my own creative journey. I hope some of what I've talked about today might resonate with you, might be something that you want to try. But I fully support the fact that what worked for me and the way that this collaboration worked for me and benefited my creativity is not necessarily going to be the same for you. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll watch again on the next episode.